The stagecoach rattled into White Pine, Nevada on a scorching June afternoon in 1877, carrying a woman who had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. But the cowboy who helped her down from the dusty coach took one look into her green eyes and felt his entire world shift beneath his boots. Sophia Prescott steadied herself against the wooden frame of the coach, her traveling dress covered in a fine layer of desert dust that had worked its way through every crack and crevice during the long journey from Philadelphia. Her auburn hair had long since abandoned any pretense of the neat bun she had pinned that morning, wisps curling damply against her flushed cheeks. The Nevada sun beat down with an intensity she had never experienced in her life, making the air shimmer above the packed dirt of Main Street. The cowboy who reached up to help her had calloused hands that were surprisingly gentle as they wrapped around her waist. He lifted her down as though she weighed nothing at all, setting her carefully on solid ground. When she looked up to thank him, she found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a face that was all sharp angles and sun-bronzed skin beneath the shadow of a worn Stetson. "Thank you kindly," she managed, suddenly breathless in a way that had nothing to do with the thin mountain air. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. He held her gaze for a moment longer than strictly necessary before stepping back and tipping his hat. "Welcome to White Pine." Sophia smoothed her skirts and glanced around the small mining town, trying to orient herself. The main street was lined with wooden buildings that looked temporary despite their solid construction, as though the whole town might pack up and move on when the silver ran out. A general store, a saloon with swinging doors that released bursts of laughter and piano music, a hotel with a hand-painted sign advertising rooms by the week or month. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. "I am looking for the Vaughn Ranch," she said, turning back to the cowboy. "I was told it was near the town." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "The Vaughn Ranch," he repeated slowly. "That would be about 5 miles north of here. You have business there." Sophia lifted her chin slightly, aware of how her answer would sound. "I am betrothed to Thomas Vaughn. We have been corresponding for 6 months, and he sent for me to come west so we might be married." The cowboy went very still. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its warmth. "Thomas Vaughn. Yes, do you know him?" A muscle twitched in his cheek. "I know him. I am Dalton Vaughn. Thomas is my brother." The earth seemed to tilt slightly beneath Sophia's feet. She had known Thomas had family, of course. He had mentioned a brother in his letters, though never in any great detail. She had pictured an older man, perhaps, or a younger boy. She had not pictured this tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed composure. "Oh," she said, aware of how inadequate the word was. "I did not realize. Thomas never mentioned that you might be in town today." "Thomas does not know I am here." Dalton bent to retrieve her traveling case from where the coach driver had set it in the dust. "I had business with the land office. I will take you to the ranch." It was not quite an offer, more of a statement of fact. Sophia found herself nodding before she had fully considered whether it was appropriate to ride alone with her future brother-in-law to a remote ranch. But what choice did she have? She could hardly walk 5 miles in this heat, and she had come too far to falter now. Dalton led her to where a buckskin mare was tied to the hitching post outside the general store. The horse was beautiful, with intelligent dark eyes and a coat that gleamed like old gold. He secured her case behind the saddle, then turned to her. "Can you ride?" "I have ridden in the park," Sophia said, then flushed when she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Of course, riding sedately through Fairmount Park bore no resemblance to what passed for riding out here. But I can manage. You will have to ride with me. I did not bring a second horse. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down for her. Put your foot on mine and give me your hand. Sophia hesitated only a moment before complying. His hand was warm and strong as it closed around hers, and then she was being lifted up to sit side saddle in front of him. It was shockingly intimate, his arm coming around her waist to hold her steady, his chest solid against her back. She could feel the heat of him even through the layers of her traveling dress and his worn cotton shirt. "Hold on," he said quietly, and urged the mare into an easy walk. They rode in silence for the first mile, leaving the small cluster of buildings behind and following a dusty track that wound through sparse sage and juniper. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all muted greens and browns beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. In the distance, she could see the ragged peaks of the mountains, and closer, the dark mouths of mine shafts scarring the hillsides. "How long have you been corresponding with Thomas?" Dalton asked finally, his voice rumbling through his chest into her back. "6 months, as I said." "He placed an advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer seeking a wife. I answered it." "Why?" The blunt question surprised her. "I beg your pardon. Why would a woman who looks like you, who speaks like you do, who clearly comes from some means, answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride?" There was genuine curiosity in his voice, not judgment. "You could have your pick of men back east." Sophia stared at the mare's twitching ears, considering how much to tell him. "I had my pick of a certain type of man," she said finally. "Men who saw me as an ornament for their households, a way to forge connections with my father's business associates. After my mother died last year, my father began pressing me to accept one of my suitors. I wanted something different. A chance to build a life on my own terms, even if that meant marrying a stranger." She could feel Dalton's attention focused on her, though she did not turn to meet his gaze. "Thomas told you about the ranch, about what life is like out here." "He told me about the land, about building something lasting. He was honest about the hardships, I believe. I am not naive, Mr. Vaughn. I know this will be difficult." "Dalton," he said. "You might as well call me Dalton, seeing as we will be family soon enough." The word family should have been reassuring. Instead, it sent an odd pang through Sophia's chest. She nodded and tried to focus on the landscape passing by rather than the distracting warmth of the man holding her. "What is Thomas like?" she asked after another silence. "His letters were cordial but reserved. I feel I know very little about him, truly." Dalton took his time answering. "Thomas is a good man, responsible. He manages the ranch accounts, deals with the buyers for our cattle. He is fair with the hands we hire. He does not drink to excess or gamble our money away." It was a list of virtues, but Sophia noticed what was absent. Nothing about Thomas's humor, his passions, his dreams. Nothing about what made him who he was beyond his function on the ranch. "And you?" she asked. "What is your role?" "I handle the cattle and the horses, breaking the wild mustangs, training them, moving the herds to better grazing, fixing fences and water troughs, the work that keeps your hands busy and your mind quiet." There was something in the way he said it that made her think his mind was not always as quiet as he might wish. Before she could probe further, he pointed ahead. "There. That is the ranch." Sophia followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, sheltered on 3 sides by rising hills. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling single-story structure built of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse, corrals where horses milled about in the late afternoon sun. Cottonwood trees grew near what must be a creek or spring, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. It was beautiful. Wild and rough, but beautiful. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the house onto the porch. He was tall, though not quite as tall as Dalton, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore clean trousers and a pressed shirt, looking more like a banker than a rancher. He stood very straight as he watched them approach, and even from a distance, Sophia could feel his eyes on her. Thomas Vaughn, she thought. Her future husband. Dalton guided the mare up to the porch and dismounted, then reached up to help Sophia down. His hands lingered at her waist for just a moment before he released her and stepped back. "Thomas," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "your bride has arrived." Thomas descended the porch steps, and Sophia had her first clear look at the man she had promised to marry. He was handsome in a refined way, with hazel eyes and even features. He looked her over with an assessing gaze that made her feel like a horse at auction, then nodded slightly, apparently satisfied. "Miss Prescott," he said, his voice pleasant but formal, "you made good time. I did not expect you for another week." "The trains ran ahead of schedule," Sophia replied, extending her hand. Thomas took it briefly, his grip cool and impersonal, then released it. "I trust your journey was not too arduous, long but manageable. Your brother was kind enough to escort me from town." Thomas glanced at Dalton, something unreadable passing between them. "Yes, that was fortunate. Come inside. You must be exhausted and in need of refreshment." He turned and headed back up the porch steps without waiting to see if she followed. Sophia exchanged a quick look with Dalton, whose expression had gone carefully blank. He collected her traveling case and jerked his head toward the house. Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and sturdy furniture arranged in conversational groupings. Woven rugs covered the plank floors, and curtains softened the windows. A hallway led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. "Mrs. Chen prepares our meals and keeps the house," Thomas said, gesturing to an older Chinese woman who appeared from what must be the kitchen. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Prescott, who will be my wife. Please show her to the guest room so she might freshen up before supper." Mrs. Chen, who had weathered features and kind eyes, nodded at Sophia. "Come," she said simply, and led the way down the hallway. The guest room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small wardrobe. The single window looked out over the corrals toward the mountains beyond. Mrs. Chen set the pitcher of cool water on the washstand and studied Sophia with an expression that might have been sympathy. "You rest," she said. "Supper in 1 hour." After she left, Sophia sank down on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of doubt. What had she done? She had traveled halfway across the country to marry a man who looked at her like she was an entry in his ledger book, whose touch had been utterly devoid of warmth. Thomas Vaughn was exactly what his letters had suggested: practical, reserved, appropriate. A good match on paper, but it was not Thomas's face that filled her mind as she unpinned her hair and washed the dust from her face and hands. It was Dalton's blue eyes, the way they had darkened when she mentioned coming to marry his brother. The warmth of his arm around her waist as they rode. The gentleness in his calloused hands. She shook her head sharply. She was being a fool. She had not come all this way to develop an infatuation with her future brother-in-law. Thomas was her intended, and she would fulfill her commitment. She had chosen this path, and she would walk it with her head held high. By the time she made her way to the dining room, she had composed herself. Thomas sat at the head of the table, with places set at his right and left. Dalton was already seated at the left, freshly washed and with his hair still damp. He stood when she entered, as did Thomas, though Thomas's movements were a beat slower. "Please sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair at his right. "I hope the accommodations are adequate." "They are lovely, thank you." Sophia took her seat as Mrs. Chen began bringing out dishes: roasted beef, potatoes, greens that must have come from a kitchen garden, fresh bread. It was a substantial meal, far more than she had expected. "Mrs. Chen has been with us for 3 years," Thomas said, serving her a portion of beef. "Since our mother passed, she is an excellent cook and keeps the household running smoothly." "I am sorry for your loss," Sophia said quietly. "You mentioned your mother's death in one of your letters, but I did not realize it was so recent." Thomas nodded curtly. "It was a difficult time, but we have managed. Dalton and I have run the ranch together since our father died 5 years ago. It is a good operation. We run about 300 head of cattle and sell horses to the army and the mining operations. The ranch is profitable and growing." He spoke about the ranch like it was a business proposition, which she supposed it was in a way. She was entering into a partnership as much as a marriage. She should have expected this. It was what she had signed up for. "And you have hands who help with the work?" she asked, trying to show interest. 3 full-time hands and a few day laborers we hire during roundup and branding," Dalton said. It was the first time he had spoken since they sat down. "The hands stay in the bunkhouse. You will not be bothered by them." "I did not imagine I would be," Sophia replied, meeting his gaze. "I am not delicate, despite what my appearance might suggest." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "That is good. Life out here does not have much use for delicacy." "Miss Prescott will learn what she needs to learn," Thomas said, an edge creeping into his voice. "There is no need to make it sound more daunting than it is. We have help, and the house is well appointed. It is not as though she will be living in a dugout on the prairie." Dalton's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. "How soon were you planning for the wedding?" Sophia asked, directing the question to Thomas. "I thought perhaps a week, to give you time to settle in. The circuit preacher comes through White Pine twice a month, and he is due back next Saturday. We could have a simple ceremony at the church in town, then a small celebration here at the ranch. Nothing elaborate but respectable. A week. She would be married in a week." Sophia took a steadying breath and nodded. "That sounds perfectly reasonable." The rest of the meal passed with stilted conversation about the ranch, the town, the weather. Thomas did most of the talking, laying out his plans for expanding the herd, his thoughts on the political situation in Nevada, his opinions on the best way to manage ranch accounts. He was clearly intelligent and capable, but he spoke to her rather than with her, never asking her opinion or showing interest in her thoughts. Dalton, by contrast, barely spoke at all. But she was acutely aware of his presence across the table, the way he watched her when he thought she was not looking, the tension in his shoulders whenever Thomas spoke about their upcoming marriage. When the meal finally ended, Thomas stood. "I am sure you are exhausted from your travels, Miss Prescott. Dalton and I have business to discuss, but please feel free to retire whenever you wish. Mrs. Chen will show you anything you need." It was a dismissal. Sophia rose, murmured her goodnights, and retreated to her room. She could hear the low rumble of male voices from the main room, Thomas's measured tones and Dalton's deeper replies, but she could not make out the words. She changed into her nightgown and lay in the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver squares on the floor. In the distance, a coyote yipped, and somewhere closer, a horse whinnied softly. It was so different from Philadelphia, from the sounds of carriages on cobblestones and the gaslight glow through lace curtains. She had wanted different. Well, she had certainly achieved that. Sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, Sophia woke to unfamiliar sounds. Roosters crowing, horses nickering, the low of cattle somewhere in the distance. Sunlight streamed through the window, already warm despite the early hour. She dressed quickly in a simple cotton dress more suited to the heat than yesterday's traveling clothes and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Chen was already at work, pulling fresh biscuits from the oven. She looked up when Sophia entered and gestured to the pot on the stove. Coffee. Help yourself. Men already out working. Sophia poured herself a cup and sipped it cautiously. It was strong enough to wake the dead and bitter as sin, but it was hot and she found herself grateful for it. What time do they start working? Before dawn. Always much to do on ranch. I would like to help if there is anything I can do. Mrs. Chen studied her with those shrewd dark eyes. You know how to cook, clean. I can learn, Sophia said. I was not raised to run a household alone, but I am not afraid of work. The older woman's expression softened slightly. Then you help me today. Learn how kitchen works, what men like to eat. Good wife knows how to feed her husband. So Sophia spent her first full day at the ranch learning the rhythms of Mrs. Chen's kitchen. She helped prepare a massive midday meal that was packed into baskets and loaded onto a wagon for Mrs. Chen's husband, who worked as one of the ranch hands, to take out to wherever the men were working. She learned how to coax the temperamental stove to the right temperature for baking, how to use up every scrap of meat and vegetable so nothing was wasted, how to make butter and cheese from the milk of the 2 cows kept in the small dairy barn. It was hot, physical work, and by afternoon, her hair was escaping its pins and her dress was damp with sweat. But there was something satisfying about it too, about producing something tangible and necessary with her own hands. She did not see Dalton or Thomas all day. They came in as the sun was setting, both covered in dust and smelling of horses and leather and sweat. Thomas barely glanced at her as he headed to wash up. Dalton's eyes found hers immediately, and she saw surprise flicker across his face when he took in her flour-dusted dress, and the strand of hair stuck to her damp cheek. "You have been working," he said. "Mrs. Chen was kind enough to teach me about the kitchen," Sophia replied. I wanted to be useful. Something that might have been admiration crossed his features. Most women who come out here from back east spend their first week complaining about the heat and the dust and the lack of society. I am not most women. No, he said quietly, holding her gaze. I am beginning to see that. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Sophia could not quite name. Then Thomas returned, his hair slicked back and his shirt changed, and the spell broke. Over supper, Thomas outlined his expectations for their marriage. He spoke in the same practical tone he used for discussing cattle prices. She would run the household, oversee Mrs. Chen, act as hostess when necessary. She would not be expected to help with the heavy ranch work, though she could tend a garden if she wished. She would bear children to carry on the Vaughn name and inherit the ranch. It would be a partnership of mutual benefit and respect. He never once mentioned love or even affection. Sophia listened and nodded and told herself this was fine. This was what she had agreed to. Love was for novels and fairy tales. Real marriages, practical marriages, were built on sturdier stuff. But her eyes kept drifting across the table to where Dalton sat, his jaw tight, his food barely touched. And when their gazes met, she felt something in her chest pull tight and warm. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and hard work. Sophia spent her days with Mrs. Chen, learning everything she could about running a ranch household. She met the hands. Mr. Chen, silent and efficient, Miguel, young and quick with a smile, and old Pete, who had worked ranches in Texas before drifting north and who told stories that made her laugh despite their improbability. Thomas treated her with cool courtesy, showing her the ranch accounts, explaining his plans for the future, asking her opinion on minor household matters while clearly expecting her to agree with his decisions. He never touched her except the most formal and brief contact. He never sought her out except when necessary. He was, in every way, exactly the sort of husband she had expected, responsible, appropriate, and utterly impersonal. Dalton was avoiding her. She knew he was avoiding her because she caught glimpses of him throughout each day, always at a distance. She would look up from the garden. She was starting to see him riding out toward the far pastures. She would step onto the porch to watch the sunset and spot him disappearing into the barn. She would hear his voice in the main room, discussing ranch business with Thomas, only to have the conversation end abruptly when she entered. It should not have mattered. He was her future brother-in-law, nothing more. But his absence left an ache in her chest that she could not explain and did not want to examine too closely. On Thursday afternoon, 3 days before the wedding, she was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare preserves from the wild berries Mr. Chen had gathered when Dalton came in through the back door. He stopped short when he saw her, clearly not having expected her presence. "I need water," he said tersely, moving to the pump at the sink. "Of course." Sophia stepped back to give him room, wiping her berry-stained hands on her apron. Mrs. Chen, with the uncanny instinct of someone who knew when to make herself scarce, murmured something about checking the root cellar and disappeared. Dalton pumped water into a dipper and drank deeply, his throat working. When he finished, he set the dipper down and gripped the edge of the sink, his back to her. "You have been avoiding me," Sophia said quietly, his shoulders tensed. "I have been busy with ranch work." "That is not true, and we both know it." He turned slowly to face her. In the slanting afternoon light coming through the window, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. "What do you want me to say, Sophia?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made her heart skip. "I want you to tell me why you cannot stand to be in the same room with me." "Because it hurts," he said roughly, the words bursting out as though against his will. "Because every time I look at you, I think about how you are going to marry my brother in 3 days, and it feels like someone is twisting a knife in my gut." The air left Sophia's lungs. "Dalton, I know I have no right," he continued, his voice low and fierce. "You came here for Thomas. You made a commitment to him. I know all of that. But from the moment I helped you down from that stagecoach, from the moment I looked into your eyes, I have not been able to think straight. And it is wrong, and I am ashamed of it, but I cannot make it stop." Sophia stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should have been shocked, scandalized. She should have fled the room. Instead, she found herself taking a step toward him. "You think I do not feel it too?" she whispered. "Do you think it is easy for me to sit across the table from you every night, knowing I am promised to someone else?" Dalton's eyes darkened. "Sophia, do not say that." "Why? Because it makes it real. It has been real from the beginning, Dalton. I have been trying to ignore it, to convince myself it is just nerves about the wedding, but I cannot anymore." He closed his eyes briefly, his hands fisting at his sides. "What are we supposed to do? You gave your word to Thomas. I will not have you break your promise, and I will not betray my brother." "Then we do nothing," Sophia said, even as her heart was breaking. "I marry Thomas as planned, and we bury whatever this is between us. We act like nothing happened. Can you do that?" His eyes opened, pinning her with their intensity. "Can you marry him, share his bed, bear his children, and pretend you feel nothing for me?" The image his words conjured made bile rise in her throat. "I have to. I came here to marry Thomas to build a life. I cannot go back to Philadelphia. I have no home there anymore. You could, Dalton said desperately. I could give you the money for passage. You could start over somewhere else, somewhere away from this mess. And be what? A woman who could not keep her commitment, who ran away because things got difficult. She shook her head. I will not do that. I will not break my word. Dalton made a rough sound of frustration and turned away from her, bracing his hands on the sink again. His whole body was taut as a bowstring. Then God help us both. Sophia wanted to go to him, to put her hand on his shoulder to offer some comfort. But she knew if she touched him now, she would not be able to stop. So she stayed where she was, her berry-stained hands twisted in her apron, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. I should go, she said finally. Yes, he said without turning around. You should. She fled to her room and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, shaking. She had come west to escape society's expectations, to find freedom in building something of her own. Instead, she had trapped herself more thoroughly than she ever had been trapped back east. She was honor-bound to marry a man she respected but did not love, while her heart yearned for his brother, who she could never have. There was no way out. She could only go forward. That night at supper, Thomas announced that they would go into town the next day to meet with the preacher and finalize arrangements for the wedding. Sophia nodded and smiled and said all the appropriate things. Across the table, Dalton stared at his plate and said nothing. The trip into town the next morning was agonizing. Thomas drove the wagon, keeping up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the town, the people she would be expected to socialize with as his wife. Sophia sat beside him, nodding in the right places while her mind was miles away. White Pine had grown busier since her arrival. The street was crowded with wagons and horses, miners heading to and from the surrounding claims, a freight team unloading supplies at the general store. Thomas tied up the wagon outside the small whitewashed church at the end of the street. The preacher was a thin, weathered man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He asked them a few questions, satisfied himself that they were both of age and entering into the marriage willingly, and made note of the date for the ceremony. It took less than 30 minutes to arrange the course of the rest of her life. As they were leaving, a woman hailed them from across the street. She was perhaps 30, dressed in a practical brown dress with her blonde hair pinned neatly beneath a bonnet. She crossed to them with a warm smile. Thomas Vaughn, you cannot come to town without introducing me to your bride, she said. I am Emma Foster. My husband runs the general store. A pleasure to meet you, Sophia said, finding a smile from somewhere. You must come to tea tomorrow, Emma insisted. I know how lonely it can be when you first arrive out here. All the other women will want to meet you. That is very kind, but we have much to prepare for the wedding. Nonsense. Every bride deserves a proper welcome. Come at 2 o'clock. I will not take no for an answer. Sophia glanced at Thomas, who shrugged. If you wish, it would be good for you to make connections in town. So it was settled. After they completed a few more errands, gathering supplies and stopping by the land office where Thomas had business, they headed back to the ranch. Sophia stared at the passing landscape and tried to imagine making this drive for years, for decades, with Thomas beside her. Tried to imagine a life where this was simply normal. She could not do it. That evening, Dalton did not come to supper. Thomas said he was dealing with a fence break in the north pasture and would be back late. Sophia ate mechanically, answering Thomas's questions about her meeting with the preacher and her tea invitation, and excused herself as soon as she could. She could not sleep. The moon was high and bright, flooding her room with silver light. Finally, she gave up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders over her nightgown, and slipped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the day's heat. The sky was a riot of stars, more than she had ever seen in her life. The Milky Way swept across the heavens in a glowing river of light. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly alien. "Cannot sleep." She jumped and turned to find Dalton standing at the corner of the porch. He must have just returned, because he still smelled of dust and horse and the sage that grew on the rangeland. "I did not hear you," she said, pulling her shawl more tightly around herself. "Sorry, I did not mean to startle you." He climbed the porch steps and leaned against the railing, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I thought everyone would be asleep by now. I could not stop thinking," Sophia admitted, "about tomorrow, about everything." She moved to stand beside him, looking out over the moonlit yard. "About how I have made a terrible mistake, but there is no way to unmake it." "You could still change your mind," Dalton said quietly. "Thomas would be angry, but he would get over it. I would help you. I meant what I said about the money for passage." "Where would I go?" "Back to Philadelphia to admit failure. To some other town where I know no one and have no prospects." She laughed bitterly. "At least here I have a home waiting for me, even if it is not the one I want." Dalton turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "What do you want, Sophia?" She should not answer, should not say the words that hovered on her tongue. But the moonlight and the darkness and the knowledge that this might be her last chance made her reckless. "I want you," she whispered. "God help me, I want a life with you. I want to wake up beside you and work beside you and build something together. I want to know you, all the parts Thomas's letters never mentioned. I want everything I cannot have." Dalton closed his eyes as though she had struck him. "Sophia, I know we cannot. But you asked what I wanted, and that is the truth." When he opened his eyes again, they blazed with emotion. "I cannot do this. I cannot stand here with you and not—" He broke off and pushed away from the railing. "I am leaving." "What?" "I am leaving the ranch. I will pack my things and go." "Tonight?" "No." Sophia grabbed his arm without thinking. "Dalton, you cannot. This is your home, your ranch. Where would you go?" "Somewhere else. California, maybe, or up to Montana. I can always find work with horses." His voice was rough, strained. "But I cannot stay here and watch you marry Thomas. I cannot do it. Thomas needs you. The ranch needs you. Thomas can hire someone. Hell, he is probably better off without me. We have never seen eye to eye on how the ranch should be run." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm, though his fingers lingered on hers for a moment. "This is the only way, Sophia. If I stay, I will do something we will both regret. I will not make you an adulteress, and I will not betray my brother, but my will is not endless, so I have to go." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. "I do not want you to go. I know. I do not want to go either, but sometimes what we want and what we must do are two different things." He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Be happy, Sophia. Or if you cannot be happy, at least be content. Thomas will take care of you. He is a good man." "He is not you." Dalton's jaw worked. Then, with a sound that was half groan and half sigh, he pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. His arms came around her, holding her close, and for a moment they simply stood there in the moonlight, taking comfort in what they could never truly have. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I am so damn sorry. So am I." He held her for another long moment, then gently set her away from him. Without another word, he turned and walked into the house. Sophia stood on the porch, shaking, listening to the sounds of him moving around inside, packing his belongings. She should stop him. She should go to Thomas's room, wake him, tell him everything. But what would she say? That she had fallen for his brother, that they had not done anything wrong but wanted to. That the marriage Thomas planned was already poisoned before it began. In the end, she did nothing. She stood on the porch until Dalton emerged with his saddlebags and a bedroll, until he saddled his buckskin mare in the pale moonlight, until he swung up and rode away into the darkness without looking back. Only then did she allow herself to cry in earnest, muffling the sobs in her shawl so no one inside would hear. The next morning, Thomas was furious to discover Dalton gone. He went from room to room, finding the note Dalton had left and reading it with mounting anger. Sophia stayed in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, feeling numb. When Thomas finally stormed into the kitchen, his face was flushed with rage. "Did you know about this? Did Dalton say anything to you about leaving?" "No," Sophia said, which was not quite a lie. Dalton had not told her he was leaving until he had already decided. What did the note say? That he needed to move on, that he thought it was best if he found his own way. After everything we built together, he just walks away. Thomas slammed his hand on the table, making Sophia jump. "This is a terrible time for him to leave. We have the fall roundup coming, horses that need breaking. How am I supposed to manage everything alone?" "You have the hands," Sophia said quietly, "and I can help more." "You?" Thomas looked at her as though she had suggested flying to the moon. "You know nothing about running a ranch. Then teach me. I am not useless, Thomas." He waved a dismissive hand. "This is not your concern. I will hire someone to replace Dalton. In the meantime, I will have to work twice as hard to keep things running." He paced to the window and stared out, his shoulders rigid. "I do not understand it. Why would he leave now? Because of me," Sophia thought, guilt twisting in her stomach. "Because I ruined everything." "Perhaps he simply wanted his own life," she offered. "It must be difficult, sharing a ranch with a brother. Maybe he wanted to build something that was his alone." "We had an agreement," Thomas said coldly. "You do not just abandon an agreement because it becomes inconvenient." The irony of the statement, given that she was tempted to do exactly that with their engagement, was not lost on Sophia. She said nothing. Thomas left the kitchen still muttering angrily, and Sophia sank into a chair. Mrs. Chen came over and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is not your fault," the older woman said quietly. Sophia looked up at her in surprise. "You knew. I have eyes. I see how he looks at you, how you look at him, and I see what is not there between you and Thomas." She shook her head. "But sometimes life does not give us what we want. Only what we can endure." "I do not know if I can endure this," Sophia whispered. "You can. Women are stronger than men think, you will see." But Sophia did not feel strong. She felt shattered. She still had to go to tea at Emma Foster's that afternoon. Thomas insisted, saying it would look strange if she canceled now, and appearances mattered in a small town. So she put on her best dress, pinned up her hair, and rode into White Pine beside a silent, seething Thomas. The tea was held in the parlor above the general store, a cozy room filled with women of various ages who welcomed Sophia with friendly curiosity. Emma Foster introduced them all. Margaret Hayes, the doctor's wife; Clara Wilson, whose husband ran the assay office; Ruth Brennan, widow of a miner and now running his claim herself; and several others whose names blurred together in Sophia's exhausted mind. They asked her the expected questions: where she was from, how she found ranch life, what she thought of White Pine. Sophia answered mechanically, going through the motions of polite conversation while her mind was elsewhere. "And you are marrying Thomas Vaughn," Emma said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "We were all surprised when we heard he had sent for a mail-order bride. He always seemed quite content as a bachelor." "He decided it was time to settle down properly," Sophia replied, the practiced response. "His brother Dalton is quite handsome as well," said one of the younger women, a girl named Sarah who could not have been more than 19. "Is he seeing anyone?" "Dalton has left the ranch," Sophia heard herself say. "He is heading to California." The women exchanged surprised looks. "Left?" "But the ranch is his as much as Thomas's," Emma said. "Their father left it to both of them." "Yes, well, he felt it was time to make his own way." "What a shame," Sarah sighed. "All the good ones leave or get snatched up by mail-order brides from back east." "Sarah," Emma admonished, but she was smiling. The conversation moved on to other topics. A new family moving into town, a dispute over water rights between two mines, gossip about the saloon owner's daughter who was said to be carrying on with one of the dealers. Sophia sipped her tea and nodded and smiled and felt like she was watching the whole thing from a great distance. When the tea finally ended and she could make her excuses, she found Thomas waiting with the wagon. He was still angry, his movements sharp and his words clipped. The ride back to the ranch was silent. That night, alone in her room, Sophia faced the reality of her situation. Tomorrow was Saturday. Tomorrow she would marry Thomas Vaughn. The day after that, she would be his wife in truth, expected to share his bed and his life. And somewhere out there, riding toward California or Montana, or wherever his buckskin mare carried him, Dalton would be trying to forget her. She could still run, could take a horse and ride away in the night, leave a note of apology and disappear. But where would she go? She had no money, no family to return to, no skills that would let her support herself. And more than that, she had given her word. She was a woman of honor even if her heart was breaking, so she would go through with it. She would marry Thomas. And she would spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Saturday morning dawned clear and hot. Mrs. Chen helped Sophia dress in the only formal gown she owned, a pale green silk with cream-colored lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not a proper wedding dress, but it would have to do. Mrs. Chen pinned up her hair and tucked a spray of wild roses into the arrangement. "You look beautiful," the older woman said. "Thank you," Sophia replied hollowly. Thomas was waiting in the main room, dressed in his finest suit. He looked her over and nodded approval. "You look well. Shall we go?" They rode to town in the wagon, Mr. Chen and Miguel accompanying them as witnesses. The church was empty except for the preacher and his wife. There would be no guests, no celebration beyond the small gathering back at the ranch afterward. It was all very practical and efficient, like everything else about Thomas. Sophia stood at the altar and listened to the preacher intone the words of the marriage ceremony. She made her responses when required, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It was cool and foreign against her skin. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said. Thomas leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief and impersonal, more a sealing of a contract than an expression of affection. When he pulled back, his expression was satisfied. He had completed the task he set out to do. He had acquired a wife. They signed the register. The preacher's wife congratulated them. And just like that, it was done. Sophia was Mrs. Thomas Vaughn. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever and no time at all. Sophia stared at the mountains in the distance and wondered if Dalton had made it through them yet. Wondered if he was thinking of her the way she was thinking of him. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Chen had prepared a celebratory meal. The hands were invited to join them, and there was even a bottle of whiskey that old Pete produced from somewhere. Toasts were made, and food was eaten, and everyone acted as though this was a joyful occasion. Sophia played her part. She smiled and thanked people and accepted their congratulations. She ate the food on her plate without tasting it. She laughed at old Pete's jokes without hearing them. She was a bride on her wedding day, and she had never felt more alone. As the sun set, the hands drifted back to the bunkhouse. Mrs. Chen and her husband retired to their small cottage behind the main house, and Sophia was left alone with her new husband. Thomas poured himself a glass of whiskey and gestured for her to sit in the main room. She did, perching on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "That went well," Thomas said, settling into his chair. "Everything was properly done. The town will have no cause for gossip." "That is good," Sophia managed. Thomas studied her over his glass. "You seem subdued. Are you unwell? Just tired? It has been a long day." "Of course." He set down his glass and stood. "I suppose we should retire. I will give you a few minutes to prepare yourself." "My room is the last door on the right." Sophia's stomach clenched. She had known this was coming, but the reality of it was suddenly overwhelming. "Thomas, I wondered if we might wait just a little while until we know each other better." His expression hardened. "Wait. We are married, Sophia. I have been patient, allowing you time to settle in before the wedding. But we are husband and wife now, and I expect us to fulfill all the obligations that entails." "I understand, but I simply thought—" "I did not send for a wife to decorate my parlor," Thomas said coldly. "I sent for a wife to run my household and bear my children. If you had reservations about the physical aspects of marriage, you should have stated them before you traveled 2,000 miles at my expense." Sophia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. "I did not say I had reservations. I merely asked for a little more time, and I am declining your request." He moved toward the hallway, then paused and looked back at her. "I will expect you in 10 minutes." He left her sitting there, shaking with a mixture of fear and rage and despair. This was her life now. This was what she had chosen. A man who saw her as a function, an obligation to be fulfilled. She thought of Dalton's gentle hands, his tender touch when he wiped away her tears, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the way he had held her that last night as though she was something precious. But Dalton was gone, and she was here, bound by law and faith to a man who would never love her. She rose on shaking legs and walked to her room to prepare herself for her wedding night. She removed the pretty dress and the wild roses from her hair. She brushed out her auburn locks and put on the nightgown Mrs. Chen had laid out for her. Then, with her heart hammering and her hands cold, she walked down the hallway to Thomas's room. The door was ajar. She pushed it open to find Thomas already in bed, the covers pulled up to his waist. He watched her enter with an expression that was more assessing than passionate. "Close the door," he said. Sophia did as she was told. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure what was expected of her. "Well," Thomas said impatiently, "come here." She forced her feet to carry her to the bed. Thomas pulled back the covers in invitation, and she climbed in beside him, her whole body rigid with tension. What followed was brief and mechanical. Thomas was not cruel, but he was not gentle either. He treated the act like any other task that needed completing, efficiently and without unnecessary emotion. When it was over, he rolled away from her, satisfied. "That was acceptable," he said. "You may return to your own room if you prefer. I am not a man who requires nightly companionship in bed." Sophia did not need to be told twice. She gathered her nightgown and fled to her own room, where she finally allowed herself to cry. Silent, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She had never felt more thoroughly used and discarded in her life. This was her marriage. This was her future. And she had no one to blame but herself. The weeks that followed fell into a grim routine. Sophia ran the household, working alongside Mrs. Chen to keep the house clean and the meals prepared. She tended her garden, learning which plants would survive in the harsh Nevada climate. She mended clothes, did the accounts when Thomas asked her to check his figures, and acted as hostess on the rare occasions when Thomas had business associates visit the ranch. Thomas was not unkind, exactly. He provided for her material needs, spoke to her with civil courtesy, and occasionally even consulted her opinion on household matters. But there was no warmth between them, no companionship. They were two people sharing a house and a name, nothing more. He came to her room once or twice a week, fulfilling his husbandly rights with the same efficient detachment he brought to everything else. Sophia endured it, staring at the ceiling and thinking of anything else until it was over. She felt like she was slowly turning to stone from the inside out. She never heard from Dalton. She did not expect to. He had made a clean break, and she had to respect that, even as she missed him with an ache that never quite faded. A month after the wedding, she realized her monthly courses had not come. A week later, when they still had not arrived and she found herself retching into the chamber pot in the mornings, she knew she was carrying Thomas's child. She told him that evening after supper. He received the news with a satisfied nod. "Good, that is good. The sooner we have an heir, the better." He actually smiled, a rare expression for him. "You should take care of yourself now. No heavy lifting. Mrs. Chen can handle the harder household tasks." It was the closest thing to concern he had ever shown her. Sophia nodded mutely and excused herself to her room. She should have been happy. A baby was a blessing, a new life to love and nurture. But all she felt was trapped. She was well and truly bound now. There would be no leaving, no changing her mind. She would be a mother, tied to Thomas and this ranch forever. That night she dreamed of Dalton, dreamed of his arms around her, his voice whispering that everything would be all right. When she woke, her pillow was wet with tears. Fall turned to winter. Sophia's body changed, her waist thickening, her dresses letting out as much as they could be. The morning sickness faded, replaced by a constant fatigue. She moved through her days like a ghost, present but not truly there. Thomas hired a new hand to replace Dalton, a taciturn man named Jack who was good with horses but spoke little. The ranch continued to function. The cattle were brought down from the high pastures for winter. Hay was stacked in the barn. Wood was chopped and stacked for the cold months ahead. In December, when the first snow fell, Sophia stood on the porch and watched the white flakes drift down from a leaden sky. The landscape transformed into something beautiful and alien, the harsh browns and greens buried beneath pristine white. It was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. "You should come inside," Thomas said from the doorway. "You will catch cold in a moment." She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the small swell of her belly beneath her shawl. "It is beautiful. It is snow. It will make the ranch work harder." But he did not press her to come in, just closed the door and left her to her vigil. A rider appeared in the distance, a dark shape against the white landscape. Sophia's heart leapt before she could stop it. But as the rider drew closer, she saw it was not the buckskin mare and its rider she hoped for. It was Miguel, returning from town with supplies. She did not know why she kept hoping. Dalton was not coming back. He had made his choice and she had made hers, and this was the life she would live. But still, every time she saw a rider on the horizon, her heart would pound and her breath would catch. Every time she would be disappointed. She went inside and closed the door on the snow and the silence and the impossible hope. Winter deepened. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. Thomas gave her a new shawl, practical and warm. She gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, the stitches careful and even. They exchanged their gifts and their polite thanks, and the day passed like any other. Sophia's belly grew rounder. She could feel the baby moving now, small flutters that gradually became stronger kicks. It was strange and miraculous and terrifying all at once. A life growing inside her, A child who would call her mother. She tried to feel the joy she knew she should feel. Tried to imagine holding the baby, nursing it, watching it grow. But all she could think was that this child would bind her to Thomas forever, to a life she had never wanted, to a loveless marriage in a harsh land. She was ashamed of her lack of maternal feeling. What kind of woman did not rejoice in the prospect of a child? But she could not help how she felt, or rather, how she did not feel. In February, on a day when the temperature finally rose above freezing and the snow began to melt in patches, a rider came up the road to the ranch. Sophia was in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, and she heard old Pete's voice from the yard, greeting someone. "Rider coming," Mrs. Chen said, glancing out the window. "Not one of ours." Sophia's heart began to pound. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. The rider was tall, sitting easy in the saddle. He was leading a second horse, a fine roan gelding. As he drew closer, the angle of his shoulders, the way he held himself, became achingly familiar. "Dalton," she whispered. He had come back. Sophia stood frozen, unable to move or think. After 4 months of silence, of convincing herself she would never see him again, he was here. Actually here. Thomas emerged from the barn, his expression thunderous. She could not hear what was said, but she saw Thomas gesturing angrily and Dalton sitting calmly on his horse, clearly not leaving no matter what his brother wanted. Finally, Thomas turned and stalked toward the house. Sophia barely had time to step back from the window before he burst into the kitchen. "Your lover has returned," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "He is not my lover," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "I have never been unfaithful to you, Thomas. No." "Then why did he leave the very night before our wedding? Why is he back now?" Thomas's face was flushed with rage. "Did you think I would not figure it out? I am not a fool, Sophia. We never did anything wrong," she insisted, even as guilt twisted in her gut. "We never acted on our feelings." "That is why he left. How noble of you both." Thomas's lip curled. "And now he thinks he can come back and what? Steal my wife, take what is mine. I do not know why he came back, but I am your wife, Thomas. I carry your child. That has not changed. You are damn right it has not changed." Thomas moved closer, looming over her in a way he never had before. "You will not speak to him. You will not look at him. He can work on the ranch if he is fool enough to want to, but you will have nothing to do with him. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Sophia whispered. "Good." Thomas strode out, leaving Sophia shaking in the kitchen. Mrs. Chen put a gentle hand on her arm. "Sit down, I will make tea." "I cannot believe he came back," Sophia said numbly, sinking into a chair. "Why would he come back? Maybe you should ask him," Mrs. Chen said quietly. But Sophia knew she could not. She had made her promise to Thomas, and she would keep it. No matter how much she wanted to run outside and throw herself into Dalton's arms, no matter how much her heart ached at his nearness, she would stay away. She did not see Dalton for the rest of that day or the next. He was apparently staying in the bunkhouse with the other hands, working on breaking horses that Thomas had acquired over the winter. She heard his voice occasionally, drifting across the yard, and every time it made her chest tighten. On the third day, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to find Dalton standing a few yards away, his hat in his hands. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough. "You should not be here," she said quickly, glancing toward the house. "Thomas forbade me from speaking to you. I know, he made that abundantly clear." Dalton took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "But I had to see you, had to know you were all right. I am fine. You are lying." His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, visible even beneath her loose dress. Something that might have been pain flickered across his face. "You are carrying his child." "Yes." "Are you happy?" The question was so unexpected, so raw, that Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. It is all that matters to me." She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Sophia, I tried to stay away," Dalton said, his voice urgent. "I got as far as Sacramento. I found work on a ranch there, good work with good horses. I should have been content. But I was not. I could not stop thinking about you. I could not sleep, could not eat. I felt like I had left half of myself behind. Dalton, please do not. I know it is wrong. I know I have no right, but I had to come back. Even if all I can do is be near you, know that you are here in the world. It is better than the hell I was living without you." A tear escaped down Sophia's cheek. "This is not fair. To you, to me, to Thomas. Your being here makes everything harder. I know. God, I know, but I cannot help it." He took another step forward, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the shadows beneath his eyes. "I love you, Sophia. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die, whether you are mine or not." The words should not have filled her with joy, but they did. Despite everything, despite the impossibility of it all, knowing he loved her made something broken inside her feel whole again. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have tried not to. I have tried to be a good wife to Thomas. But I cannot make myself stop loving you." Dalton closed his eyes briefly, his jaw working. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "We can never act on it. I know that. You are his wife. You carry his child. I will not ask you to leave him or betray him." "Then why did you come back?" "Because I would rather live near you and never touch you than be anywhere else in the world without you." He smiled sadly. "Foolish, is it not?" "Not foolish," Sophia said. "Tragic." They stood there, close enough to touch but not touching, loving each other and knowing they could never truly be together. The laundry flapped in the wind between them, white sheets like surrender flags. "I should go," Dalton said finally, "before Thomas finds us." "Yes." But neither of them moved. Finally, with visible effort, Dalton stepped back. "Be well, Sophia. Take care of yourself and the baby." "Wait," she said as he started to turn away. "Why did Thomas let you come back? I would have thought he would refuse." A ghost of a smile crossed Dalton's face. "The ranch is half mine, legally. Father's will left it to both of us, share and share alike. Thomas cannot make me leave, any more than I could make him leave. So here we are, all three of us trapped by circumstance and honor." He walked away, and Sophia sagged against the clothesline pole, her legs suddenly unable to support her. This was going to be impossible. How could she live in the same house, on the same ranch, as the man she loved while married to his brother? But she had no choice. None of them did. The weeks that followed were excruciating. Sophia kept her promise to Thomas, avoiding Dalton as much as possible. But it was a small ranch, and complete avoidance was impossible. She would see him in the corrals, working with a half-wild Mustang. She would hear his voice carrying from the barn. She would catch glimpses of him riding out to check the herd. Every sighting was a knife to the heart. Thomas watched them both with suspicious, angry eyes. He became more controlling, more demanding. He wanted to know where Sophia was at all hours. He criticized her cooking, her housekeeping, even the way she walked. It was as though having Dalton back had brought out something mean and petty in him that had been hidden before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and she had simply been too numb to notice. Her pregnancy advanced. By March, she was large and ungainly, her back aching constantly, her feet swelling. Dr. Hayes came out from town to check on her and pronounced her and the baby healthy, though he cautioned her to rest more. "Your first baby often comes early," he said kindly. "You should be prepared." "Do you have someone who can help you when the time comes?" "Mrs. Chen will be there," Sophia said. "And Thomas, of course." "Good, good." Dr. Hayes packed up his bag. "Send for me when the pains start. I will come as quickly as I can." After he left, Sophia sat in her room and tried to imagine the birth. She had heard stories, whispered among the women at Emma Foster's tea gatherings, stories of pain and blood and sometimes death. Women died in childbirth out here, far from proper medical care. It happened all the time. For the first time, she felt a flutter of real fear for herself and the child she carried. That evening, she was sitting on the porch in the cool spring twilight when Dalton emerged from the barn. He saw her and hesitated, then changed direction and headed toward the bunkhouse instead. "Dalton," she called before she could stop herself. He froze, then slowly turned and walked to the porch. He stayed on the ground, maintaining the distance propriety required, but his eyes were concerned. "Are you all right? You look pale. The doctor came today. He said the baby could come early. Are you frightened?" "Yes," she admitted. "More than I thought I would be." Dalton gripped the porch railing, his knuckles white. "You will be fine. You are strong, Sophia, stronger than you know." "I do not feel strong. I feel tired and scared and trapped." "I know." His voice was soft. "I wish I could make it better. You cannot. No one can. This is the life I chose." "No," Dalton said fiercely. "This is the life that was chosen for you, by circumstance, by honor, by all the things that bind us. But you are not a coward, Sophia. You are brave and resilient, and you will survive this. You will survive and thrive and raise a beautiful child, and someday, somehow, you will find happiness again." "Will I?" She looked at him, this man she loved and could never have. "Will any of us?" "I do not know," he said honestly. "But I have to believe it is possible, or I will go mad." They were silent for a moment, the darkness deepening around them. Then Thomas's voice cut through the quiet. "Sophia, come inside, now." He was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamp light from within. Even from a distance, she could feel his anger. "Yes, Thomas." She rose awkwardly, her hand bracing her aching back. Dalton reached out as if to help her, then caught himself and pulled back. The aborted gesture hurt more than if he had not moved at all. Inside, Thomas turned on her. "I told you to stay away from him." "I was sitting on the porch. He was passing by. We exchanged a few words, nothing more. A few words too many." Thomas paced the room, agitated. "I cannot have this, Sophia. I cannot have my own brother sniffing around my wife like a dog in heat. It was not like that, and you know it. What I know is that you love him. You think I cannot see it." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Every time you look at him, your face changes. You light up in a way you never have for me." Sophia had no defense against the truth. "I am sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Sorry, you are sorry." Thomas stopped pacing and looked at her with something like desperation in his eyes. "You are my wife. You carry my child. Why can you not just be content with that? Why must you want more?" "I do not want to want more," Sophia said, her own desperation rising. "Do you think I enjoy feeling this way? Do you think I want to be in love with someone I can never have?" The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken the truth so plainly. Thomas's face went hard. "You will learn to be content. You will learn to stop looking at him that way. And if you cannot, then I will make you both so miserable you will wish you had never met." He strode from the room, leaving Sophia standing alone, shaking with anger and fear and heartbreak. She knew then that things could not continue as they were. Something had to change. But what? She could not leave. She could not ask Dalton to leave again. And she could not make herself stop loving him any more than she could make the sun stop rising. They were all trapped in a hell of their own making. 2 weeks later, on a night when the spring wind howled around the ranch house, the pain started. Sophia woke in the dark, her nightgown damp with sweat, a cramping sensation low in her abdomen. At first, she thought perhaps it was something she ate, but as the pain built and then faded, only to return a few minutes later, she knew the baby was coming. She made her way to Thomas's room and knocked on the door. He appeared half asleep and irritated, but his expression changed when he saw her face. "The baby," she managed. "It is time." Thomas's composure cracked, revealing genuine fear beneath. "But it is too soon. The doctor said we would have more time. Babies come when they come. Send someone for Dr. Hayes." "Please, Thomas." He nodded and hurried to dress. Within minutes, Miguel was riding hell for leather toward White Pine, and Mrs. Chen was at Sophia's side, helping her back to her room. "How close are the pains?" Mrs. Chen asked, her voice calm and practical. 5 minutes, maybe less. First babies usually take time. We have hours yet, but I have helped birth many babies in my life. You will be fine. Sophia wanted to believe her, but as the hours crept by and the pains grew stronger and closer together, she began to wonder if she was going to die. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, radiating from her back through her entire body, leaving her gasping and shaking. Thomas sat in the main room, useless and agitated. Mrs. Chen stayed with Sophia, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, encouraging her to breathe through the contractions, checking her progress with experienced hands. Dawn was breaking when Dalton appeared in the doorway of her room. Mrs. Chen moved to block him, but Sophia called out, "Let him stay." "Please." "Mrs. Vaughn, your husband, I do not care. Let him stay." Dalton crossed to the bed and took her hand. "I am here. I am right here." "It hurts," she gasped as another contraction built. I know, sweetheart. Just breathe. You can do this." His presence gave her strength. She squeezed his hand through the next contraction, and the next, and the ones that followed in increasingly painful succession. Time lost meaning. There was only the pain and Dalton's hand in hers, and Mrs. Chen's calm voice telling her to push. Thomas appeared at some point, saw Dalton at her bedside, and opened his mouth to protest. But Mrs. Chen snapped at him in rapid Chinese, and he retreated. Some things were more important than wounded pride. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sophia felt something give way. The pressure changed, the pain peaked, and then there was a new sound in the room, a baby crying. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the red, squalling infant in a clean cloth. "A strong, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Sophia's arms, and Sophia looked down at her son through tears. He had dark hair and a surprisingly strong grip. He was perfect. "You did it," Dalton said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You were amazing." Sophia looked up at him, this man she loved, and saw tears streaming down his face as he gazed at the baby. Thomas's baby. The child that bound her to his brother forever. "You should go," she said quietly, even though it broke her heart. "Thomas will want to see his son." Dalton nodded, released her hand, and left without another word. Thomas entered hesitantly, his eyes going immediately to the baby in her arms. "A son," he said, something like wonder in his voice. He reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Sophia asked. Thomas considered. "My father's name was John. We could call him that." "John Vaughn," Sophia said, testing it. The baby's eyes, dark and unfocused, seemed to look at her. "Hello, John." Over the next weeks, Sophia recovered from the birth and learned the rhythms of caring for an infant. John was a good baby, generally content except when hungry or wet. She nursed him in her room, sang to him, walked the floor with him when he fussed. Thomas was proud of his son, but he had little patience for the realities of infant care. He would hold John for a few minutes, then hand him back to Sophia when the baby started to cry. He spoke often of all the things he would teach John when he was older, the legacy of the ranch he would pass down. But the person who truly helped Sophia through those early days of motherhood was Dalton. He would appear in the evening when Thomas was busy with accounts or sleeping, and sit with her while she nursed the baby. He would hold John when she needed a few moments to herself, rocking him with surprising gentleness for a man who worked with horses and cattle. He carved a small wooden rattle and left it in John's cradle, saying nothing but smiling when he saw the baby clutching it. "You are good with him," Sophia said one evening, watching Dalton soothe a fussy John. "I like babies. They are honest. They cry when they are unhappy and laugh when they are content. There is no pretense. You should have children of your own someday." Dalton's expression grew sad. "Maybe, someday, if I ever meet a woman who could make me forget you." "Dalton, I know. I should not say things like that. But it is the truth, Sophia. There will never be anyone else for me. That is not fair to either of us." "No, but then nothing about this is fair." John fell asleep in Dalton's arms, his tiny face relaxed and peaceful. Dalton stood carefully and laid him in his cradle, tucking the blanket around him with gentle hands. When he straightened, he found Sophia standing close behind him. They were inches apart, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I should go," he said roughly. "Yes." But neither of them moved. The tension stretched between them, yearning and love and desperate need. Sophia swayed forward, drawn like metal to a magnet. Dalton's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lips. "If I kiss you right now, I will not be able to stop," he said hoarsely. "And then we will have done something that can never be undone. I know." Sophia, the door burst open. Thomas stood framed in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. "I knew it," he snarled. "I knew you could not keep your hands off each other." "Thomas, nothing happened," Sophia said quickly, stepping back from Dalton. "We were just what? Just about to betray me with my own brother under my own roof." Thomas advanced into the room, his hands fisted at his sides. "Do you think I am blind? Do you think I have not seen the way you look at each other?" "We have not done anything wrong," Dalton said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating through his body. "And we were not going to. We were talking, nothing more. Lies. You want her. You have wanted her from the moment she arrived, and she wants you." Thomas turned his fury on Sophia. "You are my wife. You made vows before God. Does that mean nothing to you?" "It means everything," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "I have kept those vows, Thomas. I have been faithful to you even though my heart belongs to someone else. I have tried so hard to be the wife you wanted, but you make it impossible. You are cold and controlling, and you have never once treated me like I was anything more than a possession. Because that is what you are." Thomas shouted, losing all composure. "I paid your passage. I married you. You belong to me." "She does not belong to anyone," Dalton said, his voice dangerous. "She is a person, not property. Stay out of this. This is between me and my wife. Everything about this situation involves me, whether you like it or not." Thomas turned on his brother, and for a moment, Sophia thought he might actually attack him. The two men faced each other, years of resentment and rivalry, and now jealousy boiling over. "I want you gone," Thomas said through gritted teeth. "Off this ranch. I do not care that father left half of it to you. I will buy you out, name your price and go." "No," Dalton said flatly. "No. This is my home as much as yours. I am not leaving, not unless Sophia comes with me." The words hung in the air, shocking in their implications. Thomas turned slowly to Sophia. "Is that what you want? To abandon your husband and your vows and run off with my brother?" Sophia looked at John, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Then at Thomas, his face twisted with hurt and anger. Finally at Dalton, his blue eyes steady and full of love. "I want to do the right thing," she whispered, "but I do not know what that is anymore." The right thing is to honor your commitment, Thomas said, to stay with your husband and raise our son. The right thing is to be with the person you love, Dalton countered, to not waste your life in a loveless marriage. And what about John? Sophia asked. He is Thomas's son. How could I take him from his father? You think I would let you? Thomas said coldly. If you leave alone. John stays here. The words were like a physical blow. Sophia sank down onto the edge of the bed, her legs no longer able to support her. Give up her son? She could not. She would not. Then I guess we all know where we stand, she said dully. I will not leave without John, and Thomas will not let me take him, so I am staying. Sophia, Dalton started. No, this discussion is over. She stood, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she had. I made my choice when I married Thomas. I reaffirmed it when I had his child. I will not abandon my son, no matter what I feel for you, so we are going to have to find a way to live with this situation. I cannot live like this, Thomas said. I cannot stay in this house, on this ranch, knowing my wife loves my brother. Then you leave, Sophia said, surprising herself with her vehemence. You leave, Thomas. Dalton and I have done nothing wrong. We have fought our feelings every day. We have been honorable even when it tore us apart. If you cannot handle that, if you cannot show an ounce of grace or understanding, then you are the one who should go. Thomas stared at her as though she had slapped him. You are my wife. Yes, and I have done everything you asked of me. I have kept my vows, run your household, borne your child. I have tried to be content with a marriage that has never had any warmth or love in it, but I cannot keep trying to please a man who sees me as nothing more than a possession. Her voice rose. I am done, Thomas. I am done pretending. I love Dalton. I will always love Dalton. But I am staying here and I am being faithful to you, and if that is not enough, then I do not know what else I can give you. The three of them stood in frozen tableau, the truth finally spoken aloud after months of dancing around it. Thomas's face had gone pale. I could divorce you, he said. Publicly name you an adulteress, even though you claim nothing happened. Ruin your reputation and take John from you. You could try, Sophia said, meeting his gaze steadily. But you would have to prove adultery, and there is no proof because it never happened. You would drag all of us through public scandal and still end up with nothing except a ruined reputation of your own. She saw the moment Thomas realized she was right. His shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of him. This is what my life has become, he said bitterly. Trapped in a marriage with a woman who loves someone else, knowing that I can never have her heart even though I have her hand. I am sorry, Sophia said, and she meant it. I never wanted to hurt you, Thomas. I tried so hard not to. But you did anyway. He looked at Dalton. And you. My own brother, how am I supposed to forgive this? I do not know if you can, Dalton said quietly. I do not know if I could in your place, but we are family, Thomas. We are bound by blood and land and history. We have to find a way forward. I do not see how. Neither do I, Dalton admitted. But the alternative is tearing this family apart, and I am not willing to do that. Not even for Sophia. Sophia felt tears slide down her cheeks. They were all trapped, all suffering, and there was no clear path to anything resembling happiness. Thomas stood silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and final. Fine, we will try. But things have to change. I cannot keep living like this with the two of you circling each other like moths around a flame. There have to be boundaries, strict ones. What do you propose? Dalton asked. I will take over the house and the immediate ranch operations. You focus on the cattle and horses, the work that keeps you out on the range. We will minimize our contact. Sophia is my wife, and she will conduct herself accordingly. No more private conversations, no more lingering looks. If I see anything that suggests otherwise, I will revisit my decision to let this arrangement continue." It was harsh, but it was also perhaps the only way they could coexist. Sophia nodded her agreement. Dalton, after a long pause, did the same. "All right, we will try it your way." Thomas looked at them both with hollow eyes. "I wanted a partnership, a practical marriage that would benefit us both. I thought that would be enough. I see now how foolish that was." He turned and left the room. They heard his footsteps receding down the hall, then the sound of his bedroom door closing. Sophia and Dalton stood in the quiet, John sleeping peacefully in his cradle, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him. "This is going to be impossible," Sophia whispered. "Yes," Dalton agreed. "But we will do it anyway. For John, for the ranch, for whatever scrap of honor we have left." He left then, without touching her, without looking back, and Sophia was alone with her sleeping son and the wreckage of all their lives. The months that followed were some of the hardest of Sophia's life. Thomas kept his word about maintaining strict boundaries, but his method was to retreat into cold formality. He spoke to her only when necessary, avoided being in the same room with her unless it was unavoidable, and stopped coming to her bed entirely. In some ways, it was a relief. She had dreaded his mechanical coupling. But it also felt like a death, the final demise of any pretense that their marriage was real. Dalton kept his distance as well, though Sophia would sometimes catch him watching her from across the yard, his expression full of longing. Those moments sustained her even as they broke her heart. John grew and thrived, unaware of the tensions around him. He learned to smile, to laugh, to roll over, and eventually to sit up on his own. Caring for him became Sophia's anchor, the one pure and uncomplicated love in her life. Summer came again, bringing scorching heat and dry winds. The cattle grew thin on the sparse grazing. Water became precious, with the streams running lower than anyone could remember. One evening in August, as Sophia was putting John to bed, she heard raised voices from the main room. She could not make out words, but she recognized Thomas's angry tones and Dalton's calmer responses. After a few minutes, she heard the front door slam. She went to the window and saw Dalton striding toward the barn, his movements stiff with anger. A moment later, Thomas appeared in the doorway of John's room. "I am selling my half of the ranch," he announced without preamble. Sophia turned to stare at him. "What?" "I am selling my half to Dalton. I cannot do this anymore, Sophia. I thought I could, but I cannot. Every day in this house with you is torture. Knowing you are here but will never truly be mine. It is killing me. Thomas, I have been offered a position in Sacramento, managing accounts for a large freight company. It is good work, steady pay, a chance to start over." He met her eyes and she saw real pain there beneath the anger. "I want you to come with me. You and John. We could leave all of this behind, make a fresh start somewhere new." Sophia's heart began to pound. "Leave the ranch? Why not? There is nothing for you here except a man you cannot have. In Sacramento, we could try again. Build a real marriage without Dalton's shadow hanging over us." It was tempting. A chance to escape this impossible situation, to try to make something work with Thomas in a place where Dalton's presence was not a constant reminder of what she could not have. But even as she considered it, she knew her answer. "I cannot," she said quietly. "I made a life here, Thomas, such as it is. My friends are here. Mrs. Chen, Emma Foster, the other women in town, and John should know this land should have roots. He could have roots in California. And be forever separated from his uncle, from half his heritage." Sophia shook her head. "No, if you need to go, I understand, but John and I are staying." Thomas's face hardened. "You are choosing him. Again." "I am choosing what is best for our son. Our son would be best served by having both his parents." "Then stay," Sophia said. "Stay and we will keep trying to make this work." "I cannot." Thomas's voice broke slightly. "I love you, Sophia. I know I have never said it. No, I have been cold and controlling and everything you accused me of. But I do love you, and it is destroying me to see you every day and know you will never love me back." The confession stunned her. In a year of marriage, Thomas had never once mentioned love. She had assumed he was incapable of it, or at least uninterested. To hear it now was devastating. "Thomas, I am so sorry. I never knew would it have mattered. If you had known I loved you, could you have loved me back?" She wanted to lie to give him some comfort, but she could not. "No, I do not think so. My heart chose Dalton before I even knew your name. I could not change that any more than I could change the color of my eyes." Thomas nodded slowly, accepting the truth. "Then we are done. I will leave next week. Dalton can buy me out over time. We have already discussed the terms. You will stay here as the mother of my child, and I will send money to support John. But I cannot stay and watch you two dancing around each other for the rest of my life. What about John? He needs his father." "He is an infant. He will not remember me." Thomas's voice was hollow. "Perhaps that is for the best." "You cannot mean that." "I do not know what I mean anymore." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "I hope you will be happy, Sophia. With Dalton, once I am gone and you are free to be together, I hope it will have been worth it." He left, and Sophia sank into the rocking chair, John sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside her. She had not asked for this, had not wanted Thomas to leave. But she could not deny the flicker of hope that his words had sparked. Once he was gone, once she was no longer bound by marriage, she and Dalton could finally be together, if they could both live with the cost. Thomas left on a cool morning in late September. He packed his belongings into a trunk, loaded it onto a wagon, and drove away without looking back. He did not say goodbye to Sophia or hold his son one last time. He simply left, as though erasing himself from their lives. Sophia stood on the porch with John in her arms and watched him go. She felt sad and guilty and relieved all at once. "He is really gone," Dalton said quietly. He had appeared beside her as he so often did these days. "Yes." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Sophia considered the question. "I regret hurting him, but I do not regret coming here. If I had not, I would never have met you. I would never have had John. My life would have been smaller, safer, emptier. And now I do not know what happens next." Dalton turned to face her fully. "What happens next is that we wait a respectful amount of time, 6 months, maybe a year. Let Thomas establish his new life in California. Let the gossip die down. And then, if you are willing, we get married. We raise John together. We run this ranch together. We build the life we should have had from the beginning. You would raise another man's son as your own." "I would raise your son as my own," Dalton corrected. "I already love him, Sophia. How could I not? He is a part of you." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks, but for the first time in a year they were happy tears. "Then yes, I will marry you when enough time has passed and it is proper." "To hell with proper," Dalton said, and pulled her into his arms, baby and all. He kissed her, a kiss that held a year of longing and love and promise. John squirmed between them, making a noise of protest at being squashed, and they broke apart laughing. "We probably should consider what is proper at least a little bit," Sophia said, smiling up at him. "For John's sake, if not our own." "Fair enough. 6 months, then. I can wait 6 months if I know you will be mine at the end of it." "I have always been yours," Sophia said. "From the very first moment." The 6 months were simultaneously the shortest and longest of Sophia's life. She and Dalton maintained the appearance of propriety, conscious of watching eyes in town and the need to protect John from gossip. But there was a new lightness to their interactions, a sense of hope that had been absent before. They worked together to run the ranch, Sophia gradually taking over many of the tasks Thomas had handled. She proved to have a good head for accounts and a knack for negotiating prices with the buyers who came for cattle and horses. Dalton taught her to ride properly, and she would often take John in a sling and accompany Dalton on his rounds, learning the land and the work. John grew and flourished. By the time he was a year old, he was walking and starting to say simple words. He called Dalton Da, which made both adults freeze the first time it happened. But Dalton had been more of a father to John than Thomas ever was, so perhaps it was fitting. Thomas sent money as promised, regular bank drafts that arrived with no personal note attached. Sophia wrote to him about John's development, sent photographs when they could get to town for them, but his replies were brief and impersonal. He had truly cut himself out of their lives. When the 6 months had passed and spring arrived again, Dalton proposed properly. He got down on one knee in the evening as they sat on the porch, John playing at their feet with the wooden toys Dalton had carved for him. Sophia Prescott Vaughn, I loved you from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. I have loved you through impossible circumstances and painful choices. I will love you for the rest of my life. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had been his mother's. It fit perfectly. They were married in the same little church where she had married Thomas 2 years before, but this time everything was different. Emma Foster and the other women from town came, genuinely happy for her. Miguel and old Pete and the other hands attended, dressed in their best. Even Mrs. Chen cried, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. John, nearly 15 months old now, served as their only attendant, toddling down the aisle before them and making everyone laugh. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and said Dalton could kiss his bride, the kiss was full of joy and promise and love. Sophia felt like she was finally, truly home. That night, after the celebration at the ranch and after John was asleep in his room, Dalton carried Sophia over the threshold of what was now their room. He set her down gently, his eyes full of love and desire. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We can wait if you need more time." "I have waited long enough," Sophia said, reaching up to cup his face. "I love you, Dalton Vaughn. I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was nothing like her wedding night with Thomas. Dalton was patient and gentle and passionate, taking his time to learn what gave her pleasure, making sure she felt cherished and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Sophia's head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "Neither did I." He kissed the top of her head. "We have a second chance, Sophia. Not many people get that. We are going to make the most of it." And they did. Over the years that followed, they built a life together that was everything Sophia had dreamed of when she left Philadelphia. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They added more cattle, built up their horse herd, improved the house and outbuildings. John grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the land. Dalton was the only father he knew, and the bond between them was strong and true. When John was 3, Sophia gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, and 2 years after that, a second son they called Matthew. Thomas remained in California, and over time, the breach between the brothers healed somewhat. They exchanged letters occasionally, and once when John was 8, Thomas came to visit. It was awkward at first, but seeing John happy and thriving seemed to give Thomas peace. He stayed for 3 days, met Grace and Matthew, and told Sophia he was engaged to a woman in Sacramento. "I am glad you found someone," Sophia told him sincerely. So am I. It took a long time, but I finally let go of what I could not have and opened myself to what I could. He glanced at Dalton, who was playing with the children in the yard. You two look happy. We are. Good. That is good. He smiled slightly. I think in the end, this worked out the way it should have. You and Dalton were always meant to be together. I was just too stubborn and proud to see it. I am sorry it caused you so much pain. I am sorry I was not the man you needed me to be. Thomas held out his hand and Sophia took it. No hard feelings. No hard feelings. He left the next morning, and after that, he visited every year or two, a friendly uncle to John rather than a distant father. His wife, Charlotte, came with him on later visits, and she was kind to the children and gracious to Sophia. The past was truly past. The years rolled on. John grew tall and strong, more like Dalton every day despite not sharing his blood. He worked the ranch alongside his parents, learning everything Dalton could teach him about cattle and horses and the land. Grace was spirited and clever, keeping all of them on their toes. Matthew was gentle and thoughtful, more interested in books than ranching but loved just the same. When John turned 20, he announced he was courting a young woman from town, the daughter of the blacksmith. Sophia watched him with his sweetheart and remembered herself at 18, stepping off the stagecoach into an unknown future. So much had happened since then. So much pain and struggle, but so much joy and love too. What are you thinking about? Dalton asked, slipping his arm around her waist as they stood on the porch watching John and his girl walk by the creek. About the day I arrived. About how I came here to marry your brother, but you fell first and could not let me go. I have never regretted it, not for a single moment. Neither have I. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side. We have built something good here, Dalton. A family, a life. Something worth all the pain it took to get here. We have, he agreed. And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. Grandchildren to spoil, new adventures to have. Sophia laughed. I think I have had enough adventure for one lifetime. Nonsense. The best is yet to come. And he was right. Over the years that followed, John married his sweetheart and brought her to live at the ranch. Grace fell in love with a young doctor and moved to Reno, though she visited often. Matthew went east to university, discovered a talent for writing, and returned home to document the history of the Nevada ranching communities. Grandchildren came, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Sophia and Dalton aged gracefully together, their hair going gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like newlyweds. On Sophia's 65th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, she looked around at the life she had built and felt nothing but gratitude. She had taken a chance on an unknown future, had suffered and struggled and nearly lost everything. But she had also found a love that sustained her through every trial, a partnership that made her stronger, a family that brought her joy beyond measure. No regrets, Dalton whispered in her ear as the celebration continued around them. Not a single one, she replied, squeezing his hand. You fell first, and you never let me go. Best thing that ever happened to me. Second best, Dalton said with a smile. The best thing was you stepping off that stagecoach into my arms. Sophia laughed and kissed him, surrounded by the family they had built and the love that had sustained them through everything. She had come west to marry his brother, but fate had other plans. And those plans, painful as they sometimes were, had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. Home at last, and held in the arms of the man she loved.